Today on Hearts of Heroes. One of the biggest wildfires in California history has firefighters and everyday heroes working side by side to save their community.
I had all these people that were counting on me to drive this bus, and I looked in the rearview mirror and all I could see were flames.
Plus, historic flooding wipes out roads, leaving people in one Nebraska town trapped by a rising river.
The gravity of the situation didn't hit me at all.
With no way in or out, it will take an army of aviators to save the day.
Not your everyday heroes like those in uniform, but heroes nonetheless.
A fast-moving wildfire can be terrifying enough on its own, but when you couple the raging inferno with winds as strong as a hurricane, you're looking at the makings of a major catastrophe. And that's exactly what one Northern California city faced in 2017 when it was hit by one of the worst wildfires in the state's history. As the fire swept through, everyone from first responders to everyday folks jumped in to save their community.
The picturesque counties of Napa and Sonoma in California are known globally for their beautiful rolling hills, their winding roads, and many tourist attractions in the spring and summer. But come autumn, as leaves begin to turn, people generally begin to prepare for the onset of winter. In October of 2017, there was something much more ominous on the horizon, the exact opposite of winter.
It started out as any normal day here on a shift at Santa Rosa. We did our kind of weekly checks on the stations and just really kind of normal routine for the day. But the winds started really whipping up within the city.
The major winds and severe fire conditions began igniting blazes across 8 counties.
About 9:40, we started on our first call, which was downtown, for multiple small fires that were located in our railroad district, right down in the center of town.
To make matters worse, a large wildfire broke out in the city of Calistoga, just 20 miles away. By early morning, the fire was racing towards Santa Rosa.
I was at home. My wife nudges me, wakes me up, and says, "Hey, your pager's going off, your cell phone's going crazy." I got up and I could see a massive glow looking south towards Santa Rosa.
With so many fires raging, Assistant Fire Marshal Paul Lowenthal was also called into action.
I kind of had basically two pending requests. One was to go to a fire in Napa, and one was to go to the fire on West 6th Street in Santa Rosa. Being that the priority was West 6th Street in the city, I responded to that one first, helped coordinate some evacuations, and I remember at the time thinking, wow, this was a really big fire.
As I was driving, getting closer to the city, right then and there, you then saw a wave of cars fleeing the highway in the wrong direction, and just the chaos of what was, the beginning of a devastating night for the city.
And it was about to become more dire. A much larger wildfire was on a path to overtake the city.
Came upon another fire, and it was obviously a lot larger than I thought. I made contact with our fire chief and told him we need to start evacuating Santa Rosa in the Fountain Grove area.
The firefighters needed all the help they could get, so Santa Rosa police officers jumped in.
The men and women of that department absolutely put their lives on the line and continued to do everything they could to get as many people out of harm's way as possible.
It doesn't matter the time of day, Santa Rosa's police and fire departments were on it, risking everything for the safety of the community.
Sheriff's Office!
But winds were now reaching upwards of 90 miles per hour, fueling the already dangerous conditions.
Wind, fuel, and topography are the three factors that really drive the fire. In this particular case, we had the wind. There was a lot of growth and a lot of fuel, and we had a lot of homes scattered throughout that area.
This is like a bomb went off.
The entire city of Santa Rosa was now engulfed in flames, and it wasn't just first responders on high alert.
It's just me, Elizabeth.
Allison Pratt is a nurse at Brookdale, a 15-acre senior living community.
My health and wellness coordinator called and he said there's fire. And so I was out of bed and up. So I was here close to 10 to 2 and came in the building and it was full of smoke, and then decided the evacuation plan.
Not only were the residents of Brookdale elderly, but many were in walkers and wheelchairs, so the staff of Brookdale had to really give it their all to evacuate the facility.
And they needed to be evacuated fast, as the impending doom was getting close. But the staff soon faced another frightening predicament. There were not enough people to drive the buses. The nurses and staff of Brookdale had to literally take the wheel.
I had all these people that were counting on me to drive this bus. I just told them, I have good news and I have bad news. And I said, the bad news is I've never driven a bus before. The good news is you're in for the ride of your life, so hang on. And away we went. And I looked in the rearview mirror and all I could see were flames.
Coming up, can Allison and company make it out?
The firestorm was just horrendous, the heat and the wind and the glow coming up the hill.
But first, a safety tip.
Wildfires can be one of the most unpredictable types of natural disasters. Therefore, if you're under a red flag warning, knowing what not to do can help save property and lives.
Never mow or even drive over dry grass if humidity is low and winds are high. And make sure your home has at least 100 feet of defensible space around it, giving us the ability to protect it in case the wildfire approaches.
Talk to your local fire department to learn more about the specific wildfire risk where you and your loved ones live. It's never a bad idea to be safe.
In October of 2017, one of the worst wildfires in the state's history hit Northern California.
Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, this is a mandatory evacuation order. Leave your homes.
At its peak, 8 separate counties were ablaze, and more than 36,000 acres were scorched.
It was the most devastating wildfire in the state's history, and it was ours, and it was here.
As the entire city of Santa Rosa was forced to evacuate, Brookdale nurse Allison Pratt, who was driving a busload of seniors, couldn't help but think about her own family.
I knew the residents in my bus were going to be safe. I didn't know if my family was going to be safe, and that got me, but they were.
Allison and the other staff finally made it to the safety of a community center in nearby Mendocino.
We just kind of counted heads to make sure that everybody was present and accounted for, which they were.
While Allison stayed with her residents, Brookdale staff member Christina Cruz actually headed back to the senior living facility.
I drove back that night and started fighting the fire on the properties. I just started taking garbage cans, filling them up with water, and just start putting out spot fires, because at that point, fire was still spreading.
Talk about heroes. Christina and everyone else with her weren't going to stop doing what they do best, saving others. No matter how long it took, the sheer courage and selflessness Christina exhibited is truly awe-inspiring.
For 2 days, Christina, her husband, and other staff members fought hard to ward off the encroaching fires.
I couldn't let them lose their home. If I could save their home and they could have that special place to come back to, then I've done my job well.
Yet sadly, while working to save other people's homes, firefighter Paul Lowenthal had a heartbreaking realization. His own home had burned to the ground.
It just looked like an entire wall of fire with every home in the entire neighborhood engulfed in fire. And then realized right away that my home, like several other firefighters that I was working with that night, homes were gone also.
We did have a lot of firefighters in this city that lost their homes. You wouldn't know it until a couple days into it because they were just focused on work, doing what needed to do.
We rely on these brave first responders like Paul to do their job and be there when disasters strike. So it's easy to forget that these are their communities too, and they are often just as affected by the destruction as everyone else.
I tell a lot of people this and get teary-eyed every once in a while. You know, to see your hometown burning like that, you just get this pit in your stomach.
By the time the Tubbs fire was contained, more than 5,500 structures were destroyed, half of which were homes in Santa Rosa.
It was kind of an eerie feeling. All you could really see was chimneys and foundations everywhere you looked. And it really just looked like almost like a desert, just a flat, open land.
Despite the destruction, the heroism of the people of Santa Rosa saved countless homes, structures, and lives. Christina Cruz saw firsthand how close the fire came to destroying the Brookdale Senior Facility.
Where this fence line is, the fire came all the way up here. This was my post down here where I was really fighting the fire with the garbage can. That's how close the fire came to the community. You can see the remnants of the wheelchairs that have just melted and were destroyed by the fire, and how close the fire was.
In the months following the fires, the city of Santa Rosa began rebuilding and looking toward the future.
It's unbelievable the amount of rebuilding that's going on. So when you start seeing that, it just really fills your heart because you know that it's going to be, back to normal in that community.
We're at my residence here in Larkfield Estates. We were one of the thousands of homes that were destroyed during the Tubbs fire. We've all come a long way, and at the same time, we're really excited to be back home again.
These new structures represent more than just homes and buildings. They say to the city and the rest of the world that the community of Santa Rosa is still strong and will overcome this natural disaster.
And because of the actions of staff members Allison and Christina, the people who lived at Brookdale Senior Center were also able to come back home again.
I don't think you can point out one particular person. A hero is a collective group that made this whole operation work that night. Without all of us together, we couldn't have done it.
The people who stepped up in this community and really came out in full force and did everything they do to help their neighbors, to help one another, and got people out of harm's way were the true heroes.
Coming up, a catastrophic flood leaves a Nebraska town scrambling to escape.
When you're just hearing evacuate, the river is flooding. You don't know which river, you don't know which bridges are being washed out.
The Midwest, well, it's used to its share of spring flooding. The winter snow melts and then fills rivers and creeks. But in March of 2019, floodwaters swallowed the town of Fremont, Nebraska. Bridges and roads were washed out. They were trapped. There was no way to escape the rising rivers. That is, until a heroic team of pilots literally flew in to save the day.
Located 35 miles outside of Omaha, Fremont is your typical small Nebraskan city, complete with quaint neighborhoods, a downtown Main Street, and acres of farmland.
It's a beautiful place. The people are super friendly here. Midwesterners have a friendliness about them that's nice.
In March of 2019, the people of Fremont were looking forward to a long overdue warming trend after a frigid winter.
It rained for about 2 days straight here, and it was 50-degree weather. Snow was melting rapidly with the warm rain.
However, advisories were put out to prepare for the worst, but as Adam and Mandy Liston recall, they weren't really that concerned.
People are talking like it may, storm, it may rain quite a bit. There is a chance of maybe a little bit of flooding, but we've seen flooding all the time in springtime, so it wasn't a big concern of mine.
When people live in areas susceptible to floods and other natural disasters, it's all too easy to become complacent. But it's vitally important that everyone pay attention to these advisories and have an evacuation plan.
The gravity of the situation didn't hit me at all, up until it actually did.
The warm temperatures meant that the rivers were not only filling with rainwater, they were also overflowing with melting snow and ice, causing those rivers to rapidly breach their banks.
And it started raining and all the snow started melting. All the streets and fields were just flooded, creeks were overflooding, roadways were getting flooded, and you just kind of think, well, this might be pretty bad.
With the rivers overflowing with rainwater and melting snow and ice, people needed to get out quickly.
I said, oh, I don't have to evacuate, right? And she goes, you do. The entrance is going to be blocked.
Fremont is surrounded by an entire network of rivers, creeks, and waterways, which means a major flood can spell disaster.
There's the Platte River, there's the Elkhorn River, and then little streams in between. To get anywhere from where we live, you have to cross a bridge. At that point, when you're just hearing evacuate, the river is flooding. You don't know which river, you don't know which bridges are being washed out.
Adam and Mandy managed to make it out to nearby Omaha, but others weren't so lucky. The flood ripped through the area, destroying thousands of acres of farms, homes, and businesses.
Nebraska was just completely surrounded by water. Fremont, it looked about like a third of the town's end was completely under the water, and they still had no way in or out because the roads were either destroyed or flooded over still at that time. So it was pretty catastrophic.
Thousands were trapped without food, water, or power. To make matters worse, with the roads washed out, there was no way for emergency vehicles to get into Fremont. Even boat rescues were almost impossible.
Traveling by boat wasn't safe because it was so windy. The waters were very rough. There was even an incident where 7 first responders capsized in their boat and had to be rescued by a Black Hawk helicopter. So even the boat rescues were unsafe.
Coming up, finding a way out becomes a matter of life or death.
He pretty much coded twice. And so with no response, no pulse, no breathing, it was just extremely scary.
But first, another safety tip.
If you live in a flood zone, the first thing you should do is assess your risk. Find out how vulnerable your home is to flooding by determining your elevation of flood hazards.
Contact your local emergency management agency to learn how to construct proper protective measures around your home in case flooding is imminent.
And make sure you have several evacuation routes planned and practiced. Knowledge is key to being safe, not just for you, but for your loved ones as well.
In March of 2019, the city of Fremont, Nebraska experienced a catastrophic flood that left the town surrounded by a sea of water. With no available roads to escape, a heroic team of pilots took to the sky to rescue those in need.
When things like this happen, there's a real need for people to be helped. And not everybody has an airplane and not everybody's a pilot. And I felt like it was just a good opportunity to use the airplane that I have and my piloting skills to help.
When a catastrophe of this magnitude hits, engulfing entire cities and communities, rescue and medical agencies need all the help they can get since they are working beyond full capacity.
And Nurse Tricia Egbarts knew how important it was to be there for those who may have been injured in the floods.
Sunday morning, Adam Marshall called and said, "Do you need to be at work?" And I said, I do. I don't know how I'm gonna get there. And he said, "Well, I'll fly you in." So at 8 in the morning, I threw a bag together and met him at the Millard Airport.
Gary Foraker, another person from Fremont, was sadly facing a medical emergency when the rivers started to rise.
I went to the hospital here in Fremont. The next day, they determined I needed to go to Omaha for different treatment. Of course, there was no way in or out of Fremont at that time. We were kind of an island, so ended up going by helicopter.
As Gary was boarded onto a medevac helicopter, his wife Marcia had no choice but to wait behind, even though she knew there was a possibility her husband may not survive. She turned to her pastor for support.
He told me at that time that, "I think we can get you to Omaha." And I said, "You're kidding." "How can that be?" And he said, "Well, I have a friend who's a pilot, and his plane is in Wahoo. He could probably take you."
Once again, pilot Adam Marshall stepped up and flew Marcia to Omaha to be by her husband's side.
He pretty much coded twice. And so with no response, no pulse, no breathing, it was just extremely scary. It was really pretty emotional. It's just such a relief to actually, be there with him.
Fortunately, Gary pulled through, and Marcia could not be more thankful for the generosity of pilot Adam Marshall.
Thank you very much.
Good
to see you too. I appreciated his concern for Gary and how he was doing. He's got a big heart and was just able and willing to jump in.
Hey, Gary.
How do you do, man? Thank you very much.
Yeah, anytime. Nice to meet you. Glad you're doing better.
Yes.
I'm glad that helping her had an impact on her. I'm glad that our paths crossed.
After several days, the floodwaters slowly started to recede. And while the people of Fremont still face the daunting task of recovery, they will not soon forget how a small crew of pilots became a selfless crew of heroes.
Adam Marshall did not have to do what he did. He sacrificed his time and his money and his fuel to help people he didn't even know. And what he did for our community, nobody will be able to thank him enough. You just can't. It leaves you speechless.
Growing up in Nebraska, you have these good people. People just do good things for each other. My hope is that our kids can look back on this and want to do better and be better and help out their neighbor when they can.
Thanks to the heroic actions of neighbors, complete strangers, and first responders, lives were saved and faith was restored after disaster struck both these brave communities. I'm Ginger Zee. Thanks so much for watching.